What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raffs, of course. We've got Jays. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
Well, I realized about halfway through the AFC Championship game, we had a chance at a Jays for Days Super Bowl, and then it didn't happen.
And then the best quarterback in the NFL,
right, did his thing on one leg.
Did enough on one leg, and then perhaps the most boneheaded play I've ever seen made in an NFL playoff game happened. There's no excuse. You can sigh all you want to. There's no excuse. Do you have an excuse?
No. See, I think one of the worst parts of that play was the fact that Mahomes was clearly trying to get out of bounds. It's not even like making that tackle was going to do anything, even if it was timed correctly.
Right.
Yeah. No, I don't have anything on that one. I mean, I feel bad because that's just a terrible way to kind of have that end. But
Osai also had a great game too.
Yeah.
Like he had a really good game up until that point. But
there was no reason to make that play at all.
Yep.
Yeah. I was just sitting there thinking about going to have two J quarterbacks, and then, Patrick Mahomes did Patrick Mahomes things.
There you go. Weird conference championship day, just kind of all around.
Yeah.
Like neither game, right? You come away from like the Niners were never going to win that game probably, because it's not like Purdy was spectacular, but if Purdy's still a healthy quarterback after that McCaffrey touchdown that ties it at 7-7, you probably have a different football game than you got.
Got another J quarterback in there, though.
You did. You got two J names from the same quarterback, but it didn't especially matter because there just wasn't anything the Niners were going to be able to do to keep up. And then the other game, I'll always hate it when the first thing people talk about after a football game is the referees. I will always hate that. Not to mention that, the Bengals had the ball with 2.5 minutes left and couldn't go score. Not only could they not go score, they could, at the very least, they could have not scored and not given the Chiefs enough time to try to go down the field, and they did neither. So as far as I'm concerned, and then you make a boneheaded defensive play. So the last 2.5 minutes, and also, like, the idea that just because you didn't make the right call the first time means you can't make the right call the second time. Because I keep seeing people say that, well, there was a late hit on Burrow and they didn't call it, so they shouldn't have called the Mahomes thing. The idea of you can't make the right call because you made you can't make the right call because you made a wrong call previously.
You got to move
so
forward.
Silly to me. Anyways, Chiefs Eagles in the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks. But, I mean, sure, that might have been the highlight of your weekend. But, I mean, the SEC Big 12 Challenge was ultimately lopsided in the final count between the two conferences, with the Big 12 winning 7 of the 10 matchups. But we will get to that in depth here in a moment. That will be the bulk of the podcast. But it is Monday, so we will start with winners and losers. Josh, who is your winner?
Creighton Blue Jays. Here they come.
Okay.
Beat St. John's and Xavier at home. Winning streak is up to 4. They are 1 game back in the Big East in the loss column. Against St. John's, they scored 52 points in both halves.
Mm-hmm.
All 5 starters were in double figures against Xavier, which has been part of the problem, right? You get some good performances. Kalkbrenner does his thing, and then one of the guards has a rough game. Finally, they started to get a little bit more balanced. They have proven, again, 52 points in both halves against St. John's.
Mm-hmm.
They can really score the ball. You know what they can do defensively. This is what I always expected Creighton to be. We are finally here. And, right, you get a win over Xavier to get yourself right back into the Big East title conversation, because it's sort of a jumbled mess up there at this point. Nobody's really been able to separate themselves.
Right.
And this was always the case with Creighton in particular. We talked about this idea that, right, if they can just get some wins together, all of a sudden that resume is going to start looking much, much better in terms of seeding for the NCAA tournament. The problem was they were sitting around 500, and you just can't have a great seed if you're a 500 basketball team, no matter how many other factors are in your favor and kind of in terms of how that happened. Now they're starting to pile up those wins like we always knew they were capable of and looking like the team. At least I always thought they would be. So they're my winner.
Yeah, I mean, it's the team that I believe has, I mean, they're number one in defensive efficiency. They're number 3 in offensive efficiency. I believe I saw a chart in the last 24 hours or so that says they have the best net rating in conference play. And so, I mean, this is something we've known all season, right? And I think because of, what you're getting at, that it didn't come back to Creighton Creighton is for sure over 500, and the record is looking a little nicer because right after Kalkbrenner came back, they won 3, then lost 2, so they were sitting at 9-8.
Right.
But those 2 losses were a combined 12-point losses to 2 of the other 4 best teams in the Big East.
Yeah, they had a tough stretch of games.
Right.
Yeah.
And now they've won 4 straight, like you said. They're 13-8, and they continue to be one of the 12 to 15 best teams in the country when they're healthy. And the last 4 games have shown that, and adding a convincing 17-point win over Xavier, who is also one of the best offenses in the country, holding that team to just 67 points is a feat in and of itself. And I'm on board, and hopefully over the next couple weeks that kind of starts to be the narrative with Creighton, because I think some people forgot just how good they were because they kept kind of, okay, Kalkbrenner's back, but then they look up 2.5 weeks later, and Creighton's still 9-8, and there's a lot of, well, okay. And even on this podcast, we talked about, like, at some point they just got to win a chunk of games, and they won these 4 games. Their next 3 are Georgetown, Villanova, Seton Hall. So you'd have to think they win at least 2 of those 3. So you're probably looking at a 9-4 conference, in conference play, if not 10-3 if they can go on the road and beat Seton Hall, which they're projected to do according to KenPom. But they're rolling once again. Got a really nice win over Xavier.
Yep, it was never a question of whether they could do it. It was just a question of whether they would, and they have turned this thing around and picked up those wins that they needed to.
My winner is USC. USC put themselves back into NCAA tournament contention with their week. And Arizona State and UCLA, the 2 teams that they beat. Of course, UCLA being the headline act there in terms of the achievements from the week. But I also wanted to just kind of take a second and point out how different the USC resume could be. They have 3 losses to Tennessee, Wisconsin, and UCLA the first time they played UCLA by a combined 14 points, and it was really closer than that. They lost to UCLA by 2 the first time around before beating them this week, and lost to Tennessee in overtime by 7. So even though they ended up losing by 7, they, in theory had a chance to win in regulation, go to overtime, and, you can be down by 2 with 56 seconds left and then quickly can turn into a 7-point loss pretty easily. So we could be talking about USC in a different light heading into this week, and then they've really kind of cemented themselves. If we're looking at instead of a 15-6 team that has this UCLA win being their best win, if they're we're not all that far away from it being a 16-5 team with a win over Tennessee and UCLA. It could be very different how we're talking about Andy Enfield's team. But this week they reestablished their place as a team that's definitely fighting for a NCAA tournament berth, and I think cemented themselves as the 3rd best team in this conference behind Arizona and UCLA. So USC did quite a bit for themselves in multiple different ways this week, and they are my winner.
Yeah, and for a team in the Pac-12, we talk about this all the time, that you only get so many of these opportunities to have that mark, especially when you let one slip away against Tennessee, right? You only get so many opportunities to pick up a win that's going to kind of carry your resume, so to speak. And this is, right, your second go around against UCLA. They get it done. And the other thing I want to point out here is, outside of a loss at Arizona, and despite the fact that It is a total of 57 minutes. USC is 4-1 with Vince Iwuchukwu healthy, or at least, playing. So not only do you have the benefits of the win in terms of the resume, you also kind of have what we've been talking about with Creighton, this idea that you have to evaluate this team differently since Iwuchukwu made his debut on January 12th. Because that's, 4 Pac-12 games, 3 of them against Arizona, Arizona State, and UCLA, and they're 4-1. You have to, now, you can, of course, everybody's got different opinions about how you evaluate that and what it actually means. But assuming that Iwuchukwu continues to play, more and more minutes and continues to stay healthy and be available, that has to be part of the conversation because that's the team you're evaluating coming into the NCAA tournament. Because in theory, he's there now, which is great news for him considering what he's gone through and the fact he's able to get on the court. And you're seeing the benefits in a very real way in terms of what they've been able to do since he's been part of this team.
Spot on. Who's your loser?
Wisconsin. That's 3 losses. At Northwestern, you lose by 18 at Maryland, by 10 against Illinois. You didn't score more than 63 points in any of those games, even though Tyler Wall is back. That was part of kind of this bad stretch Wisconsin has been in. Tyler Wall was hurt. That matters. That is not the story this week. So Wisconsin back down into, squarely in bubble territory here. And up next is at Ohio State, a rematch against Northwestern, and at Penn State. They're not feeling particularly confident about Wisconsin's abilities to win any of those games. Now, they could win all 3, right? It's a lot of kind of evenly matched mid-tier Big Ten teams. But they lost 3 games against teams that, okay, I've been on board with Northwestern. Losing to Northwestern on the road, not a big deal. But outside of Purdue, right, you got to beat somebody in the Big Ten. There aren't that many truly bad Big Ten teams. There are a lot of kind of average to good teams where you've got to be able to snap losing streaks, and you can't afford to lose 3 games in a row in conference play when one of those names is not Purdue or even, Michigan, Michigan State, Indiana, right? We're not talking about any of those teams in terms of the 3 Wisconsin just lost to.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin sucks, respectfully. I mean, nothing they've done this season really, apart from beating Marquette way back in early December, I'm just not sure that I think they had a mask on for the first month and a half of the season. And what you're seeing now is a team that just doesn't really have enough anywhere.
Right. Which was the question coming in, right?
Right. Like if you're the 125th offense at KenPom, 33rd in defense is not good enough. It's just not. No. Like you have to be the best defense in the country if you're going to be that poor offensively. And we talk about do you know where Tennessee is ranked in offensive efficiency? At least they were before.
It's in the 30s or something, right?
33rd, at least the last time I looked.
Yeah.
And we talk about Tennessee, rightfully so, like they have those days where that's just not good. That's just not good enough. Tennessee looks like the prime Warriors compared to Wisconsin offensively. And yeah, they just don't really do anything well enough to beat, even to your point, the good, not great, but still hard to beat Big Ten teams. And you're seeing it over the last, really the month of January.
This was a continuation of the struggles. And that's what Wisconsin has done such a good job of, right? They just always kind of seem to win the close games against the other good teams. I'm even thinking, go back to that Iowa game where Tyler Wall was waving goodbye earlier this season, and you just look up and they're 14-6 in Big Ten play without a bad loss, and that's not how the season is going.
And I think part of that is first I think their defense is better usually. Like 33rd is fine, but they're also. But the thing that I think has changed that they don't have this year that they have had, like, say, last year, is they don't have the Johnny Davis type player. Like, Chucky Hepburn is just not good enough to be that guy to carry your team. to wherever you need it to be. I mean, you go back and look, in the let's go with 2019, the 18-19 season. It's a team that finished 23-11 and 16th at KenPom. They were fourth in defense and 62nd in offense, but you had guys on the offensive end like Ethan Happ, like Dimitri Trice, and you just don't have guys that are that offensively gifted, even if the whole of your offense isn't great, that you have those guys that can, I mean, because like Johnny Davis put them on his back and carried them offensively all last year.
Yeah, I mean,
he was why they finished 25-8.
Right, he was an offense in and of himself.
Right, exactly.
And Dimitri Trice had that ability. Bronson Koenig at times had that ability, right? Outside of even, having an Ethan Happ, they've always kind of seemed to have that guy that can just, even if it's not this world beater of a player, who can just make tough shots and bail you out sometimes. And then sometimes you get Johnny Davis. Yeah, this team doesn't have either of those, and that's where you're seeing the issues.
Yeah, so they just don't have enough really on either end of the floor. Like their defense is fine, but relative to what their offense is, it's not right. It's not quite enough to consistently beat good basketball teams. I'm gonna stick in the Big Ten and go with Michigan because the Wolverines are also a team that don't have the beating good teams gene this year. Best win they have this year is Penn State at home, and that's a team they just lost to by 22 points on the road over the last few days. After 4 straight seasons with top 30 defense, they are 90th this season after being 74th last year. So they're not great offensively, even with Hunter Dickinson. I mean, they're not bad offensively, but they're definitely not great offensively. It's a team that is ranked right now 54th offensively and 90th in defense. They've fallen to 83rd in the net. They are the only Big Ten team still without a quad 1 win. The only. Michigan, even Minnesota.
Even Minnesota has
one. Even Minnesota has one quad 1 win.
I mean, it's hard to play in the Big Ten for as long as the season has gone on without just manufacturing a quad 1 win somehow.
Right. Especially when you're 5-5.
Right. It's not like they've been,
But Michigan, I believe the Minnesota quad 1 win will have been Ohio State at home. I believe that's probably where it was that they got a quad 1 win. Right? Am I remembering that correctly? That Minnesota went into Ohio State? Yeah, it was Ohio State. Went in there and won. But Michigan 0-8 in quad 1 right now. Their wins this season in the Big Ten are Minnesota on the road, Maryland at home, Penn State at home, Northwestern at home, and then Minnesota at home. So they haven't beat anybody on the road, not named Minnesota, and that was way back on December 8th. Their best chances for a quad 1 win so far this year, Virginia and Kentucky, late November, early December. Got close in both of those games, actually, but
played Virginia tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but weren't able to come away with a win there. They played Purdue pretty tough. Weren't able to come away with a win, but then you kind of back that up with getting just absolutely smoked on the road by Penn State, and whatever moral victories come with going toe-to-toe with Purdue kind of fall by the wayside when you get smoked on the road by Penn State. And so it's been a bad year, and right, they've had some injuries and some things just not go the way that they were expecting them to go. So some of it out of their control, but Juwan Howard's team certainly in a really tough spot right now, and it was another ultimately bad week for the Wolverines.
And there's some real frustration within that fan base right now, just being being from that area, the people I follow on Twitter, the people I talk to. Some is Juwan Howard the guy for this job questions, and is he ever going to get more out of this talent? Because that's what we've been talking about with this team, right? Juwan Howard's best teams were the ones where he got to do what John Beilein did and kind of take this group that you didn't expect that much out of and elevate them. All of a sudden, all these hyped recruits start coming in, and they have not been as good. I don't think that's necessarily specific to Juwan Howard. I also think there's a lot to do with college basketball experience and, sort of philosophically how to build a program. But yeah, it's not working, and you have an anchor there, and it just doesn't really seem to matter. So I am very curious to kind of follow this through the season and the off season to see what happens here, because there are some not so happy people in Ann Arbor at the moment.
And it's a great example of like all 5 stars are not created equal, and not
Mhm.
all highly touted freshmen are not created equal. I
Yep.
mean, COVID year, they go 23-5, finish third at KenPom. This is the team that wasn't really supposed to be that good, and then you look up and Michigan's undefeated, and they were just right there all season. And there were even at points where it was not just Gonzaga and Baylor; it was like Michigan belongs
Yep.
belongs in that conversation. Like they were that good at times that season, and they ended up losing to that UCLA team, I believe, in the Elite Eight, round of 64, 32. So yeah, Elite Eight. But that year, their freshmen were Hunter Dickinson and Franz Wagner. like,
Mhm.
like that is it's hard to top those things. I mean, Hunter Dickinson finished 8th in KenPom Player of the Year rankings, and then your seniors that year were Mike Smith, Isaiah Livers, Eli Brooks. Like those, that is an equally stacked from a veteran and freshman perspective, and those are the teams that are really dangerous. And the Michigan freshmen have been fine as of late, but Caleb Houston and Musa Diabate were not anywhere near as good as those 2 freshmen I just mentioned were. And this year, I mean, Jet Howard has had his moments, and but that's I mean that's about all you can say about their freshmen, right? Is
Mhm.
that Jet Howard has had his moments and looks really good and will probably be an NBA draft pick, and all of those things can be true, but it hasn't translated to success in the way that some of those earlier teams have.
Yeah.
Winners and losers. There you go. It's January 31st, January 30th, excuse me. So we have what?
Oh, we're bringing in the
Six?
countdown now.
six more winners and losers, something like that.
Something like that.
All right. Big 12 SEC Challenge. Like I said off the top, Big 12 wins it 7-3. But I don't know about you, like not necessarily in the way that I thought they would win it 7-3.
Oh, definitely not.
It was more about the depth of the conference than the elite nature of the top of it.
Yep.
Let me explain. Allow me to explain. 7-3, but the Big 12 went 3-3 in games that they had a ranked team playing in, and not in all of those games was there an SEC ranked team playing their Big 12 ranked team. It goes like this: Texas, so TCU, Iowa State, and Texas all lost as ranked teams in the Big 12. Texas lost to Tennessee. Missouri beat Iowa State, and what's the last one? And TCU lost to
Mississippi
State. To Mississippi State. The 3 games that they won in which a Big 12 team was ranked was Kansas State beat Florida, Baylor beat Arkansas, and Kansas beat Kentucky. So 3-3 in those 6 games. But then they just kind of they got some depth wins, right? Oklahoma dusted number 2 Alabama. I'm sure we'll get to that in a deeper context. Texas Tech, who still hasn't won a Big 12 conference game, beat LSU on the road. West Virginia beat number 15 Auburn in Morgantown, and Oklahoma State beat a bad Ole Miss team at home. So that one wasn't surprising in the slightest. But the Big 12 flexed its muscles with their depth rather than the elite top of the conference. Not that we need to make any sweeping declarations about that, but it wasn't 7-3, and all 6 teams won their ranked game, and they just kind of won it that way. The depth was where the conference really shined on Saturday. What say you about any of those things I just brought up?
Yeah, the first thing just in general, before we get into some of the games specifically, that was the challenge facing the SEC, right? Your top end is not quite as good. You're certainly capable of hanging in the higher profile matchups. You have a Tennessee and an Alabama to throw out there, for example, right? That paid dividends. Well, the Tennessee part of that paid dividends. So it's not like you're completely mismatched at the top. But it's what we keep talking about the Big 12, is that everybody kept saying, Oklahoma, ninth in the Big 12, just did that to Alabama. And what did we say coming into this? Watch out for Oklahoma, because that's not going to be a fun game for Alabama to play. Look what happened last time they tried.
Norman, clearly some kryptonite for the tie.
Must be the red, just the reds get too confusing because they're almost identical. I don't know. Right? Because anybody who follows the Big 12 knows Oklahoma is just not that far off from the other really good teams in the Big 12, they just have to play them all the time, so they don't win that many conference games, right? It's just not that difficult. But you have to hold your own at the top and pull some upsets at the bottom, and that's where to your point, that's where the SEC really came up short. If you want to, right now, this is a sweeping commentary about the SEC, but you needed something outside of Mississippi State beating TCU. You needed Arkansas to beat Baylor. You needed Florida to somehow beat Kansas State. You needed Auburn to take care of business against West Virginia. You needed to get that Ole Miss Oklahoma State game if you're going to have any chance of winning this thing, because you're not winning every high profile matchup. Mm-hmm. But where the Big 12 had the real advantage was that bottom, and they took care of business there. Can we start with Texas, Tennessee? Get the high profile one out of the way first.
Whatever you want, man. Whatever you want.
Well, that's a lot of power. Thank you.
That was the team that was the first game I had in my bullet points here. So
I mean, if it's whatever I want, I mean, let's just jump right into Ole Miss Oklahoma State.
I mean, if that's what you want, dog, whatever makes you happy.
Props to Olivier Nkamhoua. I mean, that dude was all over the place for Tennessee. And again, and now, Shai George-James is back. I guess this is the first thing I want to talk about, and then we can kind of get into the game specifically. I keep talking about Tennessee's offense, and I really do believe this theory that you just have to be better offensively to win 6 consecutive games in March. Mm-hmm. But like we were talking about with their offensive efficiency, it's not like they're a bad offensive team. They just have clunkers sometimes. Mm-hmm. They have guys who can, and of course, Sakai Ziegler will save that for a little bit, unless you're going to get into it before I do. He was doing his thing too. But they have legitimate offensive weapons. It's not that they're a bad offensive team. It's just that they need some things to go right to produce 70 to 80 point performances. But they're doing it consistently right now. And you can't ignore it. And they did it against a Texas team that's been, up and down defensively, but we know what they're capable of. And yeah, Texas hung in there for a little bit, and then Tennessee's defense took over, and Texas's starters scored 27 points total. Mm-hmm. And that was that.
Yeah, everything we talked about why Texas would be a tough matchup for Tennessee, it just didn't really happen. Yeah. Right? I mean, we talked about, can Texas continue to lock it down defensively? No, not in this game. Anytime that Tennessee scores 82 points, shoots 55% from the field, they're going to win. It's just going to happen. There's almost nothing you can do. And when one Tennessee player has just as many points by himself as your entire starting lineup, that's going to be an issue. I talked about how's Sakai Ziegler going to handle some tough physical guards. 22-10 on 70% shooting, of course, right. Obviously. And like you said, players not named Marcus Carr in the starting lineup had 16 total points and 6 field goals. Carr had, relative to the rest of his starting lineup companions, had a fine game, but it wasn't great. He had 11 of the 27. The bench outscored the starting lineup for Texas. Thank the Lord for the bench, because they had lost by 50.
So Jabari Rice was keeping him in there, yeah.
Right. I mean, the bench outscored the starting lineup for Texas 44-27 in this game. You're probably not going to win that basketball game. Like, I'm impressed that you guys still found a way to get to 71 points in some ways when you only got 27 from your starting lineups. But like you said, Olivier Nkamhoua was awesome, 27 points, 8 rebounds. And yeah, if you're going to beat Tennessee, you got to do basically all the stuff that Texas didn't do. And as a result, when you kind of look at it, it's kind of surprising that they only lost by 11.
Yeah. Oh, it was in danger of getting much worse than that. And they kind of made a run and got at least a little bit competitive by the end. Yeah. No, that was not an 11-point game. That was more like 18-20.
Yeah. Yeah. So go for Tennessee, but you're right. They keep, and that thing will always be there. And we're going to get to another SEC team that reminded us that this one thing is always going to be there. And Tennessee's is that the clunker game is always going to be a possibility. But when you look at their team sheet right now, there are just a lot of, you can't be the number one team in offense in efficiency at KenPom. You can't be the number one team as of Monday morning if your offense isn't at least competent, right? They overtook Houston after their win. And, right. In this stretch since December 21st, they've scored 86, 63, 87, 60, 85, 77, 56, 70, 77, 70, 82.
Yep.
Like, that's enough when you're the number one team in defense. But there's a clunker right there in the center where they scored 56 against Kentucky at home. And that will just always be there. And, to make it as very black and white as possible, they have a 5-game win streak and a 4-game win streak in those 10 games. And guess how many games it takes to win a national championship?
6.
Yep. And that will always be there. But to their credit, almost, way more times than not this year, they've scored enough points. But we're still looking for like a real streak, not one that includes like Florida Gulf Coast and Alcorn State and McNeese State and Eastern Kentucky. Because to their credit, they did win 8 straight games there, but like that's not really what we're talking about here. They score enough points more times than not, but that glaring, they could score 56 today is always going to be there.
And I will say, I'm to the point, I feel way better about this Tennessee team than any other past iteration. To me, this is clearly the best team Rick Barnes has had.
I would probably still go with the Grant Williams Admiral Schofield team. Probably. But I think this team would be a close second.
What they're doing defensively and the amount of weapons they have on offense. So I wanted to give Tennessee their props just because I have this mental hurdle with that for whatever reason. And I still have we're going to get to this come March. It's not going away, like you said. But you also have to recognize they're not getting by scoring 62 a game right now. They are doing what they need to offensively as well. Right. And then on the Texas side, those guards just need to be better. And that's what I was kind of thinking about this is why is this going so horribly for Texas offensively? I mean, they didn't shoot the ball well. That's part of it. But they don't have, and Sir'Jabari Rice is kind of this guy coming off the bench, but they don't have a lot of shot makers in terms of getting your own offense, right? In terms of their perimeter players and their interior guys, sort of the supporting cast around the guards. They don't have some kind of high level, I mean, Sir'Jabari Rice is having a good season, right? But that kind of Jalen Wilson wing player who just does what he wants and you can't really stop him. That's not how they're built. They're built to have the 2 guards and all of these other guys who kind of play off of them. And when Sir'Jabari Rice is your third option, good luck trying to guard him because he's also a really good scorer. But if those guards aren't kind of the catalyst for everything, it can get stuck really quickly. That's kind of the conclusion I've come to, is they're so reliant on their guards because they're built around 2 of the best guards in the country. You need those guys to be making things happen to make everybody's life easier. You don't really have, and Sir'Jabari tried to bail him out. He did his best with some help from his friends off the bench, and it wasn't even nearly enough. So that's something I'm looking at Texas moving forward. I mean, not that it's new, because usually the guards are spectacular and it's not a big deal. But they don't have kind of I don't see them having a guy to bail them out if the guards are bad against a team they're going to see in an Elite 8, a Final Four, that kind of thing.
Nobody has a Jalen Wilson.
That's also true. One. Yeah, I just went to the most extreme example I could think of.
Fair. But that dude would be the front runner for National Player of the Year if Zach Edey didn't exist.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Zach Edey against Michigan State this year, by the way, 70 points and 30 rebounds in 2 games. And then Tom Izzo basically came in and whined about them having the best player on the floor. That's basically what he did. He basically said he just gets to do whatever he wants. It's like, he's 7'4". Yeah, you idiot. This is the same guy who complains about like NIL. Like this is the same thing. Like job gets hard, then we're complaining about it. Anyways, I won't get on my stump about that.
No, I'm with you on that one. That one, not a fan.
Not a really bad look. Not to mention that you could call a foul literally every time Zach Edey touches the ball if the ref wanted to. Like literally every time.
Yep.
So it's a give and take. But the guy is 7'4". You're not supposed to stop him easily. That's not supposed to be the thing. The other thing is that Sir'Jabari got to be like a top 3 first name in college basketball this year.
Oh, sure.
Sir'Jabari? Are you kidding me? Shoot. I mean, that is a 5-head play. We're just going to have our child be knighted before without the Queen's consent, because we're just going to put the Sir in his name, Sir Jabari. Yeah, I'm locked in on that. But 82-71, the Volunteers beat the Texas Longhorns. Where would you like to go next? Would you like to go to the elephant in the room, the Roll Tide elephant, to be specific?
Sure.
How'd you like that? That was pretty good.
That was good.
That's pretty Bravo. Good. Oklahoma 93, Alabama 69. I want to start with, like, is there anything Alabama could have done to win this basketball game? No. Like really, like on this particular day, and it's unfortunate for them that we're going to talk about the fact that they also have the 3-point shooting clunker
right
in their back pocket at all times. But like they shot 22 threes in this game, made 6 of them. They could have made 18 of them and still would have lost this basketball.
Yeah, let's not pretend like they lost this game because of the 3-point. Well, because of their 3-point shooting.
Right.
Here's why they lost this game. Oklahoma attempted 9 fewer threes than Alabama and made 3 more of them.
Yes.
That is why they lost this game.
Right. Oklahoma, 57% from the field, 9 of 13 from the 3-point line. They made 16 of their 19 free throws. I mean, what else do you want? But they did have one of those nights. 6 of 22 from the 3-point line. Alabama only had 6 assists in the whole game, which is alarming. 6 assists on like 24 made field goals, something like that. Maybe a few more than that. I think it was 24, 25, something like that. Grant Sherfield and Jalen Hill combined for 56 on 20 of 31 shooting. No one wanted to stop them either, so that's like pretty good as well. But this was just kind of one of those games that, you know, and I don't know, and I'm going to go look, actually. I'm going to go look because like last year or 2 years ago, that really good Alabama team that lost in Norman, 66-61. Man, that game they were 10 of 28 from the 3-point line, so never mind. I was just kind of guessing that maybe they had a really bad performance there. Like 10 of 28 is not incredible, but it's also fine.
Yeah.
But that's not right. I mean, it should be mentioned because their reliance on the 3 is part of why the game got so out of hand, but also is not the main reason that they lost. Sometimes the home team is just not going to miss, and this was one of those times.
And the same thing happened, to throw Iowa State real quickly into this conversation, because that's probably not where we spend most of our time. I mean, Iowa State shot 40% from 3 and had 11 offensive rebounds. It didn't come close. Why? Missouri was 14 of 30 from 3. There are just... Sometimes it doesn't need to be more complicated than the other team just shot the lights out. They're a good basketball team playing at home. You just move on and go to the next day. There's nothing really that needs to be addressed or fixed. I mean, I'm sure Nate Oates wants better perimeter defense and guarding the 3-point line better. But I didn't look at this and change my thoughts on Alabama really at all. They had been so consistent for, the last few months. They were going to lose eventually. Now, you never want to lose the way they did, but I'm not even sure about that. I would almost maybe even argue that the way it was so lopsided makes me even less concerned about it. It's just because, like we've been talking about, they just had no chance.
The only thing I'm a little concerned about, and like I will continue to be concerned about the 3-point shooting. We're down to 188th in the country in 3-point shooting for a team that takes the 13 most threes relative to their field goal attempts. Like that will remain problematic. In the same way that Tennessee's clunkers offensively remain problematic. The other thing is that I'm just not like, they don't have a single digit loss yet this year. And at some point, to win a national championship game, you're probably going to need to win a game that you probably should have lost, or a game that you would have lost if you played it 10 times, you'd have lost 7. You know what I mean? Like,
that's a very good point.
And when they don't have it, now granted, like Gonzaga, we talked about that Gonzaga loss. Gonzaga scored 100 in regulation. Like sometimes Gonzaga is just going to do that. But their other 2 losses are by 15 to UConn, in which they only scored 67, and this game to Oklahoma, in which they only scored 69. So, and granted, it's only 3 losses since November 25th. So, like, clearly there are other things, and it's not like they don't have close wins. So I could have just as easily, like, they beat Mississippi State by 3.
Right.
this week as well. So, it's a little bit picking the stats that I want based on the point I'm trying to make, but that's just what we do.
But also you're going to lose a close game at some point.
Right.
If you go the entire that's where I thought you were going to go with this. If you go the entire regular season without a close loss, where you just lose the games where you kind of go, shrug your shoulders and say you had no chance. In a vacuum, I would rather have those losses because I think they're easier to compartmentalize and not get too phased by. But also you need to, right? You're not going to get unless you're Providence last season, you're not going to get on the right end of every single close game you play.
Right.
So at some point, if I'm Nate Oates, I'm almost kind of hoping that you get a close late game situation where things don't go well so that can be addressed before you have it, determining whether you're playing again at the end of the season during the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that's basically where I was getting to. But I don't want my team to not really know what it's like to lose a close game.
Exactly.
So they don't have the learning experiences from it.
Right.
And they don't have that yet. They have a 3-point win against Memphis. They have a 6-point win against Houston. They have a 3-point win over Mississippi State. So it's not like they haven't been in close games. I just think there's value in being able to look at a box score in which you came out the loser and be able to kind of look at that close game and decide what you could have done better. Mm-hmm. But they haven't had that this year. That's the only thing I would like to point out. And just in general, teams that lose games close, in theory, they're in those games. And they, 2 of their 3 losses, they weren't in the game whatsoever. So I don't really that doesn't really say anything about their team per se. It just is something that, if that's still the case when we get to March, I'll be a little bit concerned about that.
And it's also just the way they play lends itself to that.
Right. Exactly. Which is also
part of the concern we've been harping on with the NCAA tournament and the approach and how it prepares you for that. Yeah.
All right. Where do you want to go next?
Kansas, Kentucky.
Let's do it.
Kansas's team showed up again. That was nice to see. Finally, this week, it started to it started a little bit with the Baylor game. And then finally, it was a team with 5 contributing members on the court from an offensive perspective. Mm-hmm. So much better. Kevin McCullough was really good on both ends of the floor, even though he got hurt. He toughed it out and continued to make an impact. DeJuan Harris started actually making shots again and looked like himself. And then, of course, you get what you get from your other guys. That was my thing for Kansas, is just they looked like Kansas again. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is one of those weird games where so much was pointing that Kentucky was going to win because of the way these teams were playing, right? Ken Pom had Kentucky as favorites, all of that kind of stuff, that I sort of looked at it and went, yeah, Bill Self's not losing 4 straight. It's almost like that Kentucky-Tennessee game where you just go, well, of course it went that way, because everything said it was going to go the opposite way. It's just how it works, right? Mm-hmm. My thing for Kentucky, besides the atrocious 3-point shooting, I don't think they made one in the first half. In this kind of matchup, they have got to get the ball to Sheboy more. And they finally started doing it, and it was working. But especially in the first half, and particularly the first half of the first half.
Him only taking 9 shots in this game is criminal.
Yeah, and then he had that stretch where it was a bucket or a foul every possession. Because, as we talked about before, Kansas can't guard him. Mm-hmm. And then some of the players that Kansas hoped to guard him got injured. They were even more shorthanded, and there was some foul trouble. This was just screaming Oscar Tshiebwe 30 and 18. And it didn't even really come close. And it's not like it didn't come close because somebody else was having the game of their life.
And here's why, I hear people when they talk about Purdue's holes, but the one thing that Matt Painter will never let happen is when Zach Edey can't be stopped, the guy is going to take 25 shots.
Yep. He's going to touch the ball on every possession and get wide open threes out of it. Yeah.
Right. He doesn't make it more complex than it needs to be. Yep. Get Zach Edey the basketball and let him make the right decision, because Zach Edey's gotten to the point where he just makes the right decision every time he has the basketball. He had 38 points, 24 shots, 13 rebounds, 3 assists, and 0 turnovers against Michigan State. in every game that it's like, okay, and Michigan State did that the first time around.
Yep.
He took 26 shots in the first game against Michigan State because Michigan State decided that they were going to play him straight up. And Matt Painter said, fine, we'll give it to him over and over and over again. Yep. And he did enough with those opportunities to win the game at the very end, right? And I don't know what it is about literally every other coach who has a dominant big man. Dan Hurley's the same way. I look at UConn box scores all the time, and I'm like, you cannot tell me that Sanogo only got 9 shots in this game. That you couldn't have gotten him 4 more shots, and on those 4 possessions, at least 2 of them, that would have been the best shot you got on that possession.
And Tshiebwe did have some assists in this game too, right? Which is almost emphasizing the point even more. It should have been every single possession because he was making things happen, whether it was getting fouled, whether it was creating shots for other players in a game in which they did not shoot the ball well at all. Right. It doesn't have to be him taking a shot or scoring every possession, but it has to be forcing the defense to adjust to him every possession when it's so clear they can't.
I mean, Edey had 3 assists, 1 less than Tshiebwe had in this game, and also had 38. Right. I mean, it's not hard.
No.
And you're right. Those are the 2 bullet points here. Like what I have written down is that Kentucky went back to the Kentucky that we saw 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
The team that has 2 guys who play lots of minutes who are literally useless if they don't make shots. 3-point shots, and CJ Frederick and
Antonio Reeves.
Sorry, not Austin. Antonio Reeves. Austin Reeves is the most popular white boy in Los Angeles. Austin Reeves. Antonio Reeves. Gosh. But like when CJ Frederick and Antonio play 59 minutes together and go 0 of 8 from the 3-point line, they are going to lose to a team like Kansas. It is always going to happen 100% of the time. Because those 2 guys don't do anything else other than make shots. And when they don't make them, and Oscar Tshiebwe only takes 9 shots in the game, you're going to score 68 points. That's just what's going to happen. And and after that, everything else is peripheral because those 2 things are at the foundation of basically all of Kentucky's issues this season.
Mm-hmm.
Just not that hard.
And it's fascinating, too, because this is coming off of Tshiebwe sweeping the National Player of the Year awards, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like this was an issue last season. And all of a sudden, it's become a major issue. It's just very confusing.
But very much so.
Making sense of this game, not confusing.
No, very much not. I'm going to look. I'm actually curious. That's a good point. Okay, stats. This year, Tshiebwe is taking almost a full shot less per game than he did last year, in a full minute more on average per game.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. Whatever, man. What do I know, right? Sometimes I'll watch people Sometimes I'll see people on Twitter and their game analysis is man, I didn't even that's just props. I so much enjoy that kind of thing because there are just things that I don't see when watching basketball games. And there are people whose brains are just so much more tuned to that kind of thing than mine is. But then there are also some times that I'm just this is way more simple than it needs to be. Just pass it to the guy in the middle that's stronger and bigger than everybody else and ask him to make the right play with it. It's just not always that hard. Mm-hmm. And it seems like this year Kentucky and Calipari are trying to make it more harder than it needs to be. Harder than it needs to be.
Yeah.
Really good grammars there.
Excellent.
Great grammars there. Anywho, anything else on Kansas and Kentucky?
No, that's all I want to talk about.
Do you have any other main games you want to go to? Can we go to just kind of bouncing around the little nits and picks that we had, or where do you want
I just have a couple of things I want to throw out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. Start wherever you'd like to start, and we'll kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, Eric Stevenson basically got that win for West Virginia by himself. That was a sight to behold, and a big win for West Virginia that started off well, hasn't gone well in conference play. You get that, and we were talking about bubble teams. You get this opportunity to have a top 15 team. Right, I think Auburn's still 15th. Maybe. Oh, I'm sure they moved with the new AP poll, but when they played this game, I think Auburn was 15th. You get a top 25 team coming into your building. It's not a Big 12 team, so you get a little bit of a breather in that sense.
Auburn dropped 10 spots to 25.
Okay. So still a top 25 team, even though you just beat them.
Did they lose twice last week? Why did you drop? Did they really drop 10 spots just for losing on the road to West Virginia?
I would find that hard to believe.
No, they lost to Texas A&M at home. That's right. They got smoked by Texas A&M at home. Right.
Yeah,
okay,
that'll do it.
I was really hoping that they didn't drop 10 spots because they lost to a Big 12 team on the road.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is one of those opportunities to get yourself a nice home win. West Virginia are able to do that. Baylor quietly 6 wins in a row.
I wasn't all that impressed by this one, though.
Sure, yeah. I'm just saying, all of a sudden, my preseason predictions aren't looking quite as bad as they did a month ago.
No.
Now, they were looking awful a month ago, but we're on the upturn. Shout out to Scott Drew for making me not look like a complete idiot.
And part of that is, and you also need to give your shouts out to Jalen Bridges. Like, he might have to make a guest appearance in our intro to the podcast at some point, because that's also, like, Jalen Bridges remembered how to be an impactful basketball player again. I mean, over the last month, he had some really nice games to begin the year, and then went from November 18th to January 4th with 2 double-digit games. So he went basically 2 months with only 2 double-digit scoring games. And, he's always been a solid rebounder, but since a 8-point performance on Wednesday, January 4th, he's scored in double digits every time. He had 10 and 7 on 3 of 5 shooting, got to the free throw line several times. He's been an impactful front court guy the last month or so as well, which is also very helpful.
Yeah. And then Oklahoma State, Kansas State take care of business at home as expected. Not much to say there. Again, Oklahoma State, right? That's a win you just need to have if you're fighting on the bubble and you're playing Big 12 teams the rest of the season. Kansas State, just don't lose a game you should win in the Octagon of Doom. They got that taken care of. The other thing I want to point out, and then feel free to jump in with anything you have. For all intents and purposes, TCU didn't have Mike Miles or Eddie Lampkin in this Mississippi State game. That just needs to be addressed. This was not full-strength TCU losing at Mississippi State. This was severely depleted TCU losing at Mississippi State. So not a, world-ending loss, even if they were at full strength. Not particularly concerning to me at all, considering what they were actually out there playing with by the end of this game. So wanted to put that context around that one, because that might have been, without that context, that might have been, I would argue, the single most surprising result of these games.
The only thing I will throw into that conversation is it's basically a variation of the same conversation we've been having about TCU and Kansas State, really, but like mostly TCU, that like with both of those teams, like they have some really great like kind of dudes, and sometimes the rest of the team just doesn't show up. Now, granted, not showing up with your best players on the floor and then trying to be productive without your best players on the floor are two completely different things. But still, those two like consistent, all around balanced offensive attack things with both of those purple teams in the Big 12 are things that I will just continue to keep an eye on. But you're right. Yeah. That has to be added for context.
Those are two of the most important players.
And they still almost won the game. And they still almost won the game.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt. What's become incredibly clear to me is that Miles and Lampkin are, if you're taking sort of two guys, they're right up there with any most important duo in the country. Maybe not number one, but there aren't too many pairs ahead of those two.
I just RC4, got to give him a shout out. Like the guy just keeps doing the damn thing for Arkansas. 25 on 10 of 17 shooting. He and Devo Davis were the only offense that showed up in Waco. They had 41 of the 64 points. Nobody else had more than 7. And I will also just continue to be sad that this is the Arkansas season we've gotten. Just makes me very sad. Yep.
Just imagine if they would have been healthy with him doing this.
Yeah. It is the most backwards true statement of the college basketball season for me. One of them, at least, is that Ricky Council IV is averaging 17 3-2, and Arkansas hasn't won a road game yet, and Arkansas is outside of the top 25, and Arkansas is basically already out of the SEC race, and all of these things on January 30th, and Ricky Council, RC4 baby, is averaging 17. Those things are simultaneously true, and before the season, if you told me that, I would have not believed you. But alas, here we are.
Yeah.
The last thing I kind of have is there were just a lot of really, really good individual performances on Saturday in the challenge. You get Kobe Brown at Missouri, who had 20 and 12. In the Mississippi State game, Tolu Smith had 27, 13, and 4 blocks. Right, we had your Jalen Wilsons. Marquise Noel was a rebound and 2 assists away from a triple-double. We talked about Kamua for Tennessee, 27 and 8 there. Grant Sherfield, we kind of glossed over it, but he had 30 and 6 for the Fighting Porter Mosers in Norman. You talked about Eric Stevenson.
Mm-hmm.
In the Texas Tech game, Davion Harmon had a good 14 and 8 performance. There were a lot of really nice individual performances, especially in the games that were like, I wasn't expecting that game to go the way
Keontae George too.
Keontae George had 24. It took him 20 shots to get there, which is why I didn't include him specifically in this larger conversation. But yes, Keontae George was very good for Baylor and Waco. That's the last thing I have. I don't have anything else big.
Now we get right back to the Big 12 beating itself up.
Yes. You got anything else on the Big 12 SEC Challenge? Anything else you saw from the weekend?
No, I was keeping an eye on that Purdue-Michigan State game and then very quickly realized that was not something I needed to be paying much attention to. So,
no, not at all. Man, 38, 13, and 3. And 3. Those were steals I was giving you. They also the assists, and I think he had 2 blocks as well.
Did you see he was wearing a Big Maple shirt?
Yes, and did you see? So Purdue was wearing their throwbacks, and on their throwbacks it has on the chest it has the Nike swoosh on one side, on the upper chest, where the logos go. There was a Nike swoosh, and there's an American flag on the other one, on the other side of the chest. And Edey posted on Twitter after the game his jersey inside out. And inside out, he has a Canadian flag stitched on the inside.
That's where that came from. I saw the picture. Yeah.
So I thought that was that's the kind of thing I'll eat up 100%.
Big Maple representing. How about that?
Shouts to the Big Maple. Crap, what's his name?
Fardaws Aimaq.
Thank you, Fardaws Aimaq. Shouts to the Big Maple, who out with an ACL, Achilles.
I don't remember.
Hold on, I got you.
I think it was some kind of knee.
Fardaws Aimaq. Great podcast content right now.
I think it's even perfect just because Zach Edey even kind of looks like a maple tree. Doesn't he?
I mean, no, but
no. I don't mean that.
Maybe he has the vibes of one.
I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but just I feel like if you're going to ask me for a college basketball player that looks like a maple, oh yeah, okay. Just if you're going to ask me for a college basketball player that looks like a maple tree, he's going to be one of my top selections. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, he is definitely the one closest to the same height as a maple tree.
Yeah.
he is closest to being able to go in to battle in the post with an actual maple tree.
And he uses his hook shot, so it's kind of his branches swaying in the wind.
Do you want to keep going, or should I stop you now?
That's about all I got. I'll let you know if I come up with some more. Build off the analogy.
Please do. Speaking of the Big 12 going back to beating each other up, Baylor is at Texas on Monday night. Kansas State is at Kansas on Tuesday night.
Yep, that's what I was referring to.
West Virginia is at TCU on Tuesday night. So yeah, they just kind of they put the punching bags. Oh my gosh, what are those
Gloves?
things? The boxing gloves. Thank you. Gosh. The boxing gloves, and they put the padded helmets on so they don't hurt each other too much, so they can all go to the tournament. And man, an absolute gauntlet. An absolute gauntlet. Those games, I mean, naturally headline the action for between now and the next time we podcast. Providence is at Xavier on Wednesday night. That's a good one. But a solid slate the next few days, like conference play always is, but nothing outside of the Big 12 that is completely knocking your socks off. But when the Big 12 has like 6 of the top 15 teams in the country, that tends to be the case.
Yeah.
Purdue,
somebody playing somebody.
Way to go to the AP poll, to the AP voters. No team got a number 1 place vote except for Purdue this week. So well done. Well done.
I mean,
the AP poll doing something logical. Well done. Good job.
Was there anybody that even had an argument for a number 1 vote?
No, but it wouldn't be the first time that a team got a number 1 vote that had no argument.
You're right.
So well done. Good job. Pat yourself on the back, AP poll. That was incredibly condescending to the AP.
So poll. Okay, so now here becomes the question that I'm always fascinated by. Let's say Purdue loses this week.
Mm-hmm. Purdue at home against Penn State, I believe, is their first game this week. And then they'll play at Indiana on Saturday. So if they beat Penn State at home and lose at Indiana, yes, they should still be the number 1 team.
That's what I'm going for. Because I agree. If the gap is this large, then inherently, if they lose to an Indiana team that is playing much better on the road, the gap should not close.
Indiana 21st.
Yeah, a top 25 team. Yeah. The gap should not close that much to the point where just because number 1 lost, we need... Now, usually there are 2 or 3 teams behind that are actually making an argument, right? Mm-hmm. So it's logical. The way this thing is going, they have built up such a gap ahead of everybody else that, yes, if they lose... as long as they don't lose twice this week, if they lose the Indiana game on the road, they should still be number 1. Unless somebody does something remarkable. And I don't even know what that would be or what team that would be. So, yeah.
I agree. But if Tennessee goes undefeated and Purdue loses,
I guess Tennessee. Okay, I guess Tennessee is the team kind of making the argument. Sure, yeah.
But then again, there's still 107 points in the voting behind.
Yeah,
107.
Yeah.
Anyways, but that's not. But listen, that's not how. Let's see. Who does Tennessee play this week? Tennessee this week plays Florida and Auburn. Florida on the road, Auburn at home.
Yeah. We'll revisit this if it needs to be revisited next week once the AP poll comes out.
When you find the dude on Indiana's team that's going to stop Zach Edey, let me know. I'll be here to learn. It's definitely not 6'9" Trace Jackson Davis.
I'm looking forward to that game though. That's going to be fun.
It will be fun. The Indiana women, by the way, shouts to the Indiana women's team.
Yep.
Like 3 straight wins they beat Ohio State, the number 2 team in the country, on Thursday night. It was the most attended Indiana women's regular season game at Simon Scott Assembly Hall, I think ever. I think like there were like almost 11,000 people there. So that's really cool to see. But anywho.
Yeah,
so the IU men, not the best basketball team on campus, which is saying something considering they're 21st in the country.
Yeah, and now they're playing much better. But yeah, throughout this entire thing where everybody just gets disappointed in the men every year. Yeah, by the way, that women's program is very quickly become one of the 10 best in the country. Yeah.
Speaking of, Indiana is up to 4th in the women's poll. They went from 6th to 4th. South Carolina is still 21-0. LSU is 20-0. Stanford is 2nd at 21-2, and then it's Indiana, followed by UConn and the Fighting Caitlin Clarks of Iowa at number 6. All right, anything else? Let's get out of here.
No, I'm all good.
Cool. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod, TikTok, YouTube, all of those fun things. We'll be back on Thursday to talk about what? I'm not sure, but we'll figure it out before then and present it to you accordingly. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.